Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, the Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 112 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the third week of April 2024. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about how Ukraine shut down the first Russian bomber since the start of the war. Ukraine will keep striking Russian territory no matter what, said the head of Ukrainian intelligence. And finally, the US approved $61 billion aid package for Ukraine. So, what's next? Strategic level strike. How and with what the Russian bomber Tu-22 M3 was shot down by Ukrainians. In Russia, in the Stavropol territory, a supersonic strategic bomber Tu-22M3, which was originally designed to strike US aircraft carriers with cruise missiles, crashed. But now, by order of Putin, this and similar planes are being used for bombing peaceful Ukrainian cities. This plane constantly struck the cities of Dnipro and Sienelnikovo at night. In Dnipro, the railway station was affected, and Sienelnikovo residential buildings. According to Ukrainian sources, this bomber Tu-22 M3 aircraft was shot down by Soviet S-200 missile at a distance about 300 kilometers from the front line, or approximately 165 miles away. If anyone doesn't know, these S-200 missiles differ from other air defense missiles because they're huge and fly very far. At the same time, according to the Ukrainian side, this plane was shot down, managed to fly some distance, and fell already on the territory of the Stavropol. The Russians themselves say that it broke in the air and fell. It's really hard to believe because there are videos that the plane was on fire during the fall, and Sinja was on fire, and it fell on the ground in the ground immediately, which actually is not the characteristics of those planes that break up in the air and fall. After all, these actually planes fall downward in parabola. I think a plane with an engine on fire and circling down like this is exactly what those planes have just been shot down by a missile look like. That is most likely 90 something percent of missiles hit this 222 M3 after all. So, after much opinions and different analysis, this was likely an anti-aircraft missile that hit this bomber. In the tail of the engine is another question. But of course, the main question how's those rockets got there? Because it's pretty long distance. So the Russian Z channels are now active actively saying that they were the ones who shot their own plane. But usually, according to the Russian propaganda, when Ukraine shuts down something important or very, very important targets such as bombers or planes A-50, they always say, oh, that was us. We mistakenly shut down our own plane. Like, to be honest, I'm still not completely sure that it was a Russian air defense system. Well, in any case, if Ukraine still can shoot down Russian planes at the distance of several hundred kilometers, then it's a game changer. It will make the lives of Russian pilots unbearable. They will be afraid to fly out of the combat missions, and this is critical before Ukraine will receive F-16 aircrafts. As expected, these planes will be delivered to Ukraine in the summer with well trained Ukrainian pilots. Well, it will be very important for Ukraine forces if these Ukrainian pilots on the Western F 16s can fly under the cover of such a long range, powerful air defense systems as S 200, which can shoot down Russian planes approaching at a distance of several hundred kilometers. Of course, it will be a truly significant change on the battlefield for Ukraine. So, Ukraine's head of intelligence, Kirill Budanov, openly promised to attack the Russian Federation with long range drones, despite the criticism of the Western allies. The week before, drones attacked an aircraft factory in Kazan, where the Russian Federation manufactures and repairs bombers Tu-22M, which was just recently shut down, and Tu-160M bombers. Currently, there are no verified data on the technical component losses in open sources, but I think they will appear eventually. It must be understood that two processes are also taking place at this plant simultaneously. This is the modernization and repair plan of two 22M3 bomber as well as two 160 bomber, as well as so-called production in parallel, although this is more a restoration of the potential that remained in Russia since the Soviet times. They are now filled with equipment and all other electronic elements, and they say they have production, although most likely these facilities are just fixing the old Soviet planes. These Tu-22M3 bombers are strategic bomber missile carrying aircraft used to launch strikes on the territory of Ukraine with missiles Kh 22 and Kh 32. The Bomber 2160 can also be used with this functionality, but they are not used because it's very expensive, and secondly, they are uniquely rare, and after each flight, they need to be serviced and repaired, which also has a corresponding effect on the life of these aircraft. Therefore, they use them very limited, but the Bomber 222 M3 is quite often specifically for the task of launching missiles Kh 22 and Kh 32. So the head of intelligence, Kirill Budanov, said in an interview for the Washington Post that Ukraine military leadership has a plan to reduce Russia's military potential significantly. Ukraine has already demonstrated some effectiveness in the recent attacks and damage caused to the Russian Federation. If you remember, since this year, Ukraine already damaged several oil refineries on the Russian territory. So there is no secrecy or secret nature of the information that was strike by one or another means on the territory of Russia. The fact that we have done it, we're doing it, and we'll do it, it's not a secret anymore. I do not see any disclosure of secret information in Budanov's words, because in general, the scenario itself is not revealed. The means are not revealed, and new approaches to such strikes are not revealed as well. Each time Ukraine forces use completely different approaches. Let's put it this way: we have a rather creative attitude to the task of such strikes. Each time they are unexpected for the Russian anti-aircraft defense forces, in general for the Russian occupiers. Therefore, the fact that it will strike, that we have a strike, is not a secret. Ukraine's army goal, for example, to destroy the Kerch Bridge. Everyone knows it very well, and the Russians know it, and we know it, and our citizens know it. But how it will be done is another matter. How it will be done, no one is talking about, but the Ukraine intelligence forces are already working on it. As a result of the attack of the armed forces of Ukraine on the military airfield in the temporarily occupied Jankoy, which is located on territory of Crimea, the S-400 air defense system launchers, radar stations, air defense control center, and airspace surveillance equipment was destroyed or damaged. On the night of April 17, Explosions rang out in the temporarily occupied Jankoy in Crimea. Residents of the peninsula reported that the fires had started near the local military airfield. Jankoy Airfield is home to the 39th Helicopter Regiment of the 27th Mixed Aviation Division of the 4th Air Force and Air Defense Command of the South Military District of the Russian Army, and three aviation squadrons. According to the Russian newspaper Crimea Wind, three S-400 and two S-300 launchers were destroyed as a result of the strike. The public also reported that as a result of the recent bombings by Ukrainians, there were lots of wounded and dead Russian soldiers. According to the Ukrainian intelligence, on April 17th at the military airfield in the city Jankoy, the following were destroyed or critically damaged. There was a four launchers S-400, three radar stations, air defense control point, and airspace surveillance equipment called Fundament M. So Ukraine's strikes on Jankoy airfield in temporarily occupied Crimea was a significant defeat for the Russians. Russia, in its turn, continues to attack hospital and residential buildings, while Ukraine continues to attack the military facilities on the territory of Russia. Another terrorist attack to intimidate the civilian population was carried out last week in Chernihiv. I strongly suspect that all this is being done as part of Putin's strategy to create a sanitary zone on Ukrainian territory, which should stretch along the border with the Russian Federation. A Russian missile attack on Chernihiv has killed 18 people, according to the local officials. More than 60 people, including three children, were injured during the attack. So, if we compare this news about the Russian attack on Chernihiv with the news about the Ukrainian attack, here's the difference. Ukraine hit the military airfield in Jankoy, attacked helicopter, a frontline aviation, and S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, which were based there. And that was a strictly military airfield, the military facilities and equipment, but no civilians nearby. The Ukrainian strike turned out to be extremely effective. We still don't know what a particular number of Russian soldiers died. However, according to the Russian sources, ballistic missiles were used during the attack. Most likely, these were American ATACMS medium range missiles, which can fly as long as 160 kilometers. It has been confirmed that the S 300 and S 400 air defense systems were destroyed. Since they are now increasingly scarce in Russia, there are few of them, and they are long and difficult to manufacture. Radio components and microchips are needed, which Russia doesn't have due to sanctions, and it has to be delivered through secret paths. And most importantly, air defense systems will be important for Russia when Ukraine finally receives Western F 16 aircraft. Well, in order for these F 16s to work at full strength, it's necessary to clear the sky for their work, and this is what Ukraine is doing successfully. Therefore, strike on Russian air defense systems are far sighted and correct. Such strikes will avoid unnecessary losses of pilots and aircrafts in the future. So, why are these planes so important, anyways? So now Russia is actively using planning bombs, SAMs, and FOBs, and similar ones to break through Ukrainian defenses on the front line. The bombs are dropped from a distance of 60 70 kilometers from the front line, then it flies by itself, hits the target, and explodes. It's not very accurate, but this explosion is so powerful that the great accuracy is unnecessary, and a hole is formed in Ukraine defense, which this is what actually Russia is trying to do. There is no countermeasure against these planning bombs in the Ukrainian armed forces. They tried to use Patriot air defense systems and they helped for a while, but then, as you saw, one of those Patriots was destroyed by the Russian Iskander missile. The Patriots should stand far or located far behind the front line. They became a vulnerable target because they're close to the front line and Russians can spot it and hit it. However, the F 16 aircraft should be an antidote. They are long range and have good radars. Therefore, if a Russian bomber approaches 70 kilometers to the front line, the Ukrainian F 16s sees this bomber perfectly, can press the button, a missile will fly and will destroy this bomber. In Russia, they understand that this is a great danger. Therefore, Russian jets Su-34 will operate there as well, and S-300 and S-400 complexes will be stationed there to shoot down Ukrainian F-16s. So that the Russians do not have such an opportunity that they cannot maneuver these air defense systems and threaten Ukrainian F-16s. It's now important to destroy as many of them as possible. In general, it must be said that if the Ukraine armed forces, with the help of F 16, manage to solve the problem of COBs and FOBs being dropped on our front lines, it will be immediately become much easier for the Ukrainian infantry on the front line. These bombs are now almost the only truly effective means of attack for the Russian army. Without these bombs, the offensive will be much more difficult for the Russians, and eventually it will probably stop. So the last week had a very good news for Ukraine. It was a truly pivotal moment for Ukraine. After 5 months of stalling, the US House of Representatives finally approved more than $61 billion worth of military assistance to help Ukraine in its desperate defense against Russia, as well as billions for other allies, including Israel and Taiwan. In a bipartisan vote, 210 Democrats and 101 Republicans joined to support Ukraine, with 112 Republicans, a majority of GOP members, voting against it. It came after the Republican Speaker Mike Johnson forced a series of bills into the floor in the face of fierce resistance with his own Republican Party, many of whom oppose spending more on Ukraine defense. The Senate is set to begin considering the House passed bill on Tuesday, with some preliminary votes that afternoon. Final passage was expected sometime next week, which would clear the way for Biden to sign it into the law. Members were voting on a package worth of $95 billion in total, but which had been broken up into four separate bills, as Johnson effectively decoupled the vote on Ukraine from funding for Israel, which is more widely supported among both Democrats and Republicans. So the $95 billion bill in total includes roughly $61 billion for Ukraine, with much of this funding going toward replenishing American munitions, $26 billion for Israel, and $8 billion for US allies in the Indo-Pacific region, including Taiwan, and $9 billion in humanitarian assistance for civilians in the war zone. In the Ukrainian bill, out of the $61 billion, about $23 billion would be used by the US to replenish military stockpiles, opening the door to future US military transfer to Ukraine. Another 14 billion would go to Ukraine's security assistance initiative, where the Pentagon buys advanced new weapon systems for Ukrainian military directly from the US defense contractors. We witnessed a pivotal moment not only in the approval of aid for Ukraine, but also in the shift in US lawmakers' attitude toward the Russian war in Ukraine. So you would ask why this is important. It is significant because the European Union typically defers to Washington in taking the first steps, or at least seeking US approval before the providing any assistance outside its borders. As such, the US $61 billion aid package should trigger more assistance from the US European states, which Ukraine desperately needs at this moment. Moreover, the US House of Representatives has voted to allow Russian assets to be confiscated in Ukrainians' favor, which should hasten European lawmakers in the process of confiscating $200 billion in Russian assets that will help Ukraine acquire the weapons it needs to liberate its territories. Yes, that's correct. We need much more. Let's not get too excited about the $61 billion package. This amount will definitely help us in the short term, but it will not enable us to win the war. Anyone who thinks that $61 billion will be enough to defeat the enemy are mistaken. Constant battles with the enemy and sporadic delivery of arms and ammunition over the past several months have not only left us short on artillery shells, but we're also in need on tanks to replace those that we have recently lost, as well as fighter jets, ammunition, and many other weapons. If Ukraine is to win the war, it needs ammunition, a minimum of 100 F 16 jets, which will be probably another $7 billion, and 300 Western tanks, which will be another probably $3 4 billion, along with hundreds of howitzers and thousands of drones, among other equipment. Let's not forget, we also need money for rockets, missiles, and the spare parts necessary to maintain this equipment, which might amount to another $3 billion. Ukraine also needs approximately $3 billion on a monthly basis for salaries and other military expenditures. So, if we add all these numbers together, Ukraine will spend the $61 billion aid package by the end of this year. Yes, you're right, by the end of 2024. This will strengthen this package will strengthen our positions on the front line and perhaps even allow an offensive, but it will not help us to win the war. If we are to win this war, we need we entirely of frozen Russian assets to change the situation at the front in our favor. Last year, Ukraine's much anticipated counteroffensive in Kharkiv and Kherson saw our soldiers push the enemy back, only to be stopped by a lack of resources, which allowed the Russians enough time to gather themselves and construct nearly impenetrable fortifications. Despite the heroism displayed by Ukraine's military, we cannot beat the enemy if our army is underfunded. If our allies want Ukraine to survive and bring Putin's reign to an end, they will do what is necessary to provide Ukraine with the $280 billion that must be sized and transferred to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine and glory to Ukrainian soldiers. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.